we have a bit of a stereotype, right? I'm not that bad, or I'm not contemplating taking my life. I am able to get out of bed in the morning. That's why they call it an invisible disability, mental health, because I didn't see those big, large red flag indicators, at least for myself, that I thought would be present. And it wasn't until I went to my doctor and said, I think something's happening. I think it's postpartum depression. And she asked, is it depression or anxiety?
Hello! Welcome to The Vibrant Introvert, the show about real people experiencing introversion and social anxiety, their stories of transformation and change, and how they thrive in their daily lives, all told through the lens of acceptance and commitment therapy. I'm Gabby Lanier. So, I have a question for you. What could it look like if you were sleeping better? A lot of us out there, including myself, will sacrifice sleep in order to get something done. In order to have some, alone time, some downtime, Netflix time, or maybe we're using that time to take care of a hungry, crying baby. Okay, and I just have to mention real quick here, because I'm sure you probably noticed that you can hear my baby in the background. I just can't find time to record when my baby's not around. I wear her all the time, so enjoy that. Whatever your barrier for achieving a good night's sleep, you're not wrong. You're just responding to a need that you might have in your life, and your behavior around sleep is therefore, rational, really, because you're simply responding to your surroundings. And in the short term, this might work for you. But what about the long term? Does sacrificing sleep work for you in the long term? And what impacts does this lack of sleep have on your mental health? Today, we're going to explore sleep, behavior, and a mental health condition that is not often talked about, which is postpartum anxiety. Our guest, Hilary McClinton, is a behavior analyst and a sleep specialist who has their own story about anxiety and how all of this was a product of her context as a mom to a child who wasn't sleeping and a product of her own very severe sleep deprivation. So when I originally recorded this interview with Hilary, I was 38 weeks pregnant. It was just before Easter, and I was anticipating this life with a second baby or second child. And of course, I was also thinking a lot about sleep deprivation because it was going to come. I knew it was going to come. And at the time, I was actually sleeping really well. I was going to bed at 9 and then waking up around 5:30 or so every day. And I loved my early mornings. I used those mornings to get some alone time in before my son woke up. And so for me, lately, I sacrifice sleep. I really do. Not just from waking up in the middle of the night, but by waking up really early, like ungodly early, because I know that that's kind of what I've been doing that made me feel so good. And I want to continue achieving that. But no matter what, this sleep deprivation looks like for me, if I don't get 8 hours of sleep, more or less, I become a complete train wreck over the course of 2 or 3 days. It takes a little while for it to kind of catch up with me, but it always catches up with me without fail. And when I take stock of this kind of constant yet fluctuating state of anxiety that I live with, I see an impact there with the sleep. So today, like I mentioned, we're going to talk a bit about the science of behavior. And that science of behavior is called the field of applied behavior analysis. And I'm going to give you context as to why it matters and why we should think about it when we think about sleep and anxiety. So the first thing I'm going to highlight here is the fact that anxiety is indeed a behavior. It's just a behavior you can't see on the outside. But like any other behavior, such as walking or talking or drinking wine, for example, it's a behavior that is triggered by its environment. And that environment can include your own internal environment, like your thoughts, your memories, your learning history, or anything that you experience through your 5 senses. Behavior analysts call these behaviors private events. And like all behaviors, anxiety is triggered by something in the environment, some antecedent. Let me give you an example. So, one of my triggers for social anxiety is when I'm being talked over in a conversation. Another trigger is when everyone looks at me in a group, like all their eyes are on me. Ugh. Or when my dad, when he calls me on the phone and he says, and I've told him not to say this, by the way, but sometimes he says it, he kind of forgets, but he'll answer the phone and say, "Mija, you'll never call me." And then he says it in a way that's really joking, but for me, it's just super cringeworthy, and I want to just kind of ball up and never answer the phone again. So when these triggers happen, the anxiety occurs, and then from there it can kind of escalate to more continued anxiety, or it can kind of dissolve into more neutral thoughts or feelings, and then I just move on with my day. It kind of just depends, right? The second thing I want to highlight is how behaviors are impacted by what we call setting events. These events occur before the trigger, and they set up behavior to be more or less likely to be triggered in any given moment. So, like I mentioned before, with that, if my dad calls me on the phone, for example, and says that thing that I don't want him to say, if I'm sleep deprived, the anxiety is so much more likely to kind of escalate. So, again, in this case, sleep or a lack thereof is a type of setting event, and it might make us more or less likely to engage in more anxiety behaviors. So, like Hilary will describe, without sufficient sleep, our body just doesn't perform at its peak, and certain functions, including brain function, can be negatively impacted by a lack of sleep. We all kind of know this, right? So, I know for me, a lack of sleep for sure impacts my ability to function, and if I pay really close attention, it can impact my ability to respond to anxiety. From there, it can also impact the way I choose to spend my day, how I interact with my family, and whether I go back to those old familiar bad habits I thought I had replaced. So, how about you? What could it look like if you were sleeping better? This is a question that Hilary asked at the end of our interview, and it seemed so significant a question. How would it impact your daily life, your quality of life, from the inside out? So let's listen to Hilary's story, hear how she slowly started to identify that postpartum anxiety she was experiencing, and how she went from suffering to becoming an advocate for those like herself.
Welcome, Hilary. I'm happy to have you here on this Saturday morning so early, the day before Easter. Thank you for reminding me that tomorrow is Easter. Yeah.
Your invitation was a reminder for me when I looked at my calendar. I was like, oh, wait a second, that's Easter.
Yeah, like, oh, no, thank you. I'd rather be eating candy really early in the morning while I'm stuffing my kids' Easter baskets. So thank you for that. That was a gift. So I'm excited to talk to you. I think you have such a fascinating role that that you specialize in, and you also have this perspective as a mom. You said that today you'd be willing to share a story, but before we get there, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Hilary. First and foremost, I'm a mom. I'm a mom of two boys, 1 6, 1 4. I can hear them upstairs right now. I live in British Columbia, beautiful British Columbia, with my husband and my family. I am a behavior analyst, so I've been working with the neurodivergent community for 20 years. And I would say the bulk of my learning has been in the last 6, shifting my lens, learning more. That's been a journey. And through that journey has been this other side journey, which we're going to talk about today. So I feel like a lot has happened. I will try to narrow my story today, but a lot has happened in the last 6 years for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I also started to specialize in sleep a few years ago with my colleague, Nicole, and then we opened our own practice, Healthy Sleep Solutions. So I wear a few different hats, and a few different things have gotten me here, which we'll talk a bit about today.
Awesome.
I also have allergies, so my apologies if I start to cough or if I start to sneeze. I bought allergy medication and it makes me drowsy, so I can't take it.
Well, I hope you got your coffee this morning.
I did, yes.
That was the one thing I was not willing to give up this time around. I'm like, nope, I'm pregnant, but I'm still drinking coffee.
Oh, I did. Of course, I did both my pregnancies. Mm-hmm.
And I'm enjoying the sounds of the pitter patter of little feet above you or below you, wherever it's coming from. So so yes, great. And I'm excited to hear too, you have this story that you're going to share today, which I think is very much kind of integrated in with what you're currently doing in the field that you're specializing in with sleep and behavior. So I know that's going to come up maybe later on in your story. I know that you've had some time to think about your story. Where do you want to start if you were to pinpoint a time when this kind of started to unravel?
It was hard for me to pinpoint as I went back and started to think about it. And partly why I reached out to you is I listened to your story. Muddy did a story with you on grief, and
Yeah.
I had listened to that. And I thought, my story is one that is one in many, but the need to normalize these conversations and to talk about what moms go through postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety. They can happen anywhere and in any form. They can occur together. You can land more on one or the other. It's and in fact, they're learning now that postpartum anxiety is more common than postpartum depression. Yet usually we hear about PPD. So I wanted to normalize it because I think, one, I just want moms to know you're okay, you will be okay, you can get help. So I thought about where my story sort of started, and I had a hard time teasing out the symptoms and kind of teasing out when they started because of sleep. And that's sort of where I think all of this lands for me, is how important sleep is in this as well. And we talked a bit about that as you're about to become sleep deprived again.
Oh, joy.
When we had our first, he was the sleeper you didn't talk about because he slept really well. And, you don't advertise that to other parents, and you don't celebrate good sleep, right? And he did. By 3-4 months, he was sleeping 6-8 hour stretches. And I remember at one point, my husband and I kind of looking at each other like, okay, this isn't so bad. When does because everybody had warned you. Of course, you hear the horror stories before you become a parent. Everybody tells you all the get sleep while you can, etc. So yeah, he was a really good sleeper. And looking back, it's likely I had some symptoms then, but they weren't exacerbated by sleep deprivation. And then I had my second. And he napped in the day, which was great, but he did not sleep at night. And even when I had him, the nurses in the hospital said he's like a 1-month-old. Like, he skipped the stage where he slept like a newborn. He was almost, how big was he? He was almost 9 pounds, but he was more alert. He was more interactive. He fed a lot. And I remember the nurses saying he's like a 1-month-old. Like, he's very active. I was like, uh-huh. So they helped me out at night because I was in the hospital for a few nights after my cesarean. So he didn't sleep at night. And it was from the get-go that he would really only get a couple hour stretches. And that on top of just the hormones going. So he was born in October, and I don't think it was maybe until spring that I realized what was happening, or that it really hit at a peak. And in part, being self-employed with both my kids, I went back to work.
Right away, probably.
Right. I went back to work with both kids within, I think, 3 months. So he was born in October. By December, I was doing some part-time stuff. And then into January, February, March, I was starting to work a bit more. And I was also looking at putting together a clinic with a friend of mine. And so there were some things going on with work, but I started to notice things. I started to notice that I wasn't just having a bad day. I started to notice it was constant. And for me, the symptoms were mixed. It was symptoms of very, very intrusive thoughts. And at night, because he was still waking, what do? You go on your phone. And, one, that light is horrible for you and your sleep. It's pretty bad for your sleep. But with Facebook algorithms, they are your worst enemy. And so any story that popped up, I would click on that was perhaps a scary story or something happening to kids or something about a mom. And then Facebook, of course, registers that you want more of that. And so they send you more of that. And then you end up getting this feed that is full of these horrifying stories. And for me, that became reality. That became a real fear. And I started going back to work, which meant travel. So I worked privately, which means I would travel to clients. And I had clients at that time in different geographical locations. And sometimes the drive would be an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. So if you think of my day, if I was seeing 2 to 3 clients, I was in my car for a good 3 to 4 hours of the day. And I remember little things starting to happen. I couldn't find my words. I was misplacing things. It's funny you mentioned coffee, because I woke up one morning and I could swear I had coffee cream and I didn't. And that's like a setting event for me. I don't have coffee cream for the day. This is going to be really bad. And I opened the cupboard and to get my coffee mug, and there was my coffee cream. So I put it in the cupboard. I was like, huh. And at first it's kind of funny. It's like, oh, I can't believe I did that. But these things were piling up. I was forgetting things. I was really irritable. Things that wouldn't typically bother me would. I was having these thoughts and these feelings that didn't feel like me. It put a strain on all of my relationships. I just felt disconnected and really angry some of the time. Mom rage is also a real thing. So it all started to bubble. And I think when it kind of hit ahead for me was, and I don't remember when it was, but I remember being in the car and a story was running through my head. And the stories that would run through my head at the time were things like I was in a car accident with the kids, or the kids were missing, or something had happened. They got sick, really sick. So there was a theme. And once the thought was in my head, that story would play out, and it would play out as if I was there. I feel like I felt everything at a higher intensity. And I remember having to pull over because I was sobbing, because I was feeling all of it as if it was happening. And I couldn't drive. I had to pull over. And I think the other thing that would pop through my head when I was driving is, okay, but you're on your way to work. You need to pull yourself together, right? That's what would stop the story, is I'm almost at a place where I need to pull myself together. I can't walk in like this. So that would stop it, just because I would have to shift focus and I would have to go to work, or I would have to go to the grocery store, or I would have to do that adult thing. And I don't have time to have this breakdown and to have this story running through my head. And that's how it stopped me. But I remember it getting to a point where it was so bad I could not unhook. I couldn't.
Yeah. Well, and I think that what you're talking about right here is such, I think, almost an extreme example of that fusion that you said you were fused. That is really interesting, because it's like you have that initial thought or that initial trigger, whatever it is, and then it kind of starts to unfold, and it starts with the thoughts, but then it like morphs into sensations and emotions, and then it kind of just keeps piling up, and it feels like your reality. Is why you're responding so strongly to it, because if that were to really happen, you would respond very strongly.
It did feel, and I mean, I don't know what that situation would feel like, but it felt incredibly real. And so I realized, this isn't okay. But I also had in my head, PPD isn't this, right? We have a bit of a stereotype, right? I'm not that bad, or I'm not contemplating taking my life. I am able to get out of bed in the morning. That's why they call it an invisible disability, mental health, because I didn't see those big, large red flag indicators, at least for myself, that I thought would be present. And it wasn't until I went to my doctor and said, I think something's happening. I think it's postpartum depression. And she asked, is it depression or anxiety? Because I talked with her about I've been looking into ACT. I've been looking into these options. I just need to clear the fog. I just need a breather. So could we try medication and just give me a breather to sort myself out, to come up with some tangible strategies to get myself into a better routine? Can we just come up with a breather? And she did ask, is this depression or anxiety? And that was my first.
Is that your like light bulb moment? Like, oh, yes, it is.
Oh, and I didn't know there were two different. I didn't know there was anxiety depression either. So I was like, oh, good point. So it's not, I had this idea of postpartum depression and what it looked like. And I didn't realize that there was actually much more to it.
Mhm.
And my doctor was the one that pointed that out, which was, it was a light bulb moment. It's like, okay, now I have a framework. Now I know. And with my training, with our training, that's helpful to me. That's my comfort zone is okay. Now I know what I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
Now I can try to tackle it because now I have a better idea of what it looks like.
Mhm. So you have this doctor's appointment with your doctor. That must have felt so validating to have someone tell you this is also something that a lot of people deal with, enough to the point where it's, a recognizable disorder. It's maybe just not talked about very much in our like landscape. So what did you do with that information? You said that you were already kind of looking at ACT as a potential modality of starting to navigate through some of this stuff. What were some of your next steps as you were starting to kind of confront this and label it and kind of like contextualizing it?
Yeah, I talked a bit about the journey that I had, that kind of started after my son. And so I had started to get a little bit more into social media in our field, and there were groups that were forming then.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think I was a little bit more in tune with what was happening in our field. I would say before that, I was practicing in a bubble, as a lot of behavior analysts do.
Yes.
I was, when you work privately, you practice in this little box and you do the thing you were trained to do and you stay with that because, that's the gold standard, that's the evidence, let's stay there. And I had definitely gotten to a place where I needed to expand my learning and I needed to open my eyes a little bit to our field and to just different pieces. And so part of that is how I stumbled onto ACT. And so my journey was also opening up a little bit and delving in a little bit more. And as I started to, I just had these light bulb moments. It's kind of like when I started to specialize in sleep, suddenly I knew how to tackle my second and his sleep. I was like, huh. So I started to look into ACT. And I think there's two books I started reading. I started reading The Happiness Trap and I started reading The Power of Small.
Yeah, The Happiness Trap is such a good starter book and just puts us back into that human role. Like, I'm a person who's suffering right now and I need to understand my emotions.
Right. And he does it in such a non-judgmental way. Like he does it in just a way that just, hey guys, this is just us as humans. This is what happens. This is what our brain does. We have this thinking self and observing self. And trust me, they both exist. Try out these exercises. I'll show you. For me, what resonated, I think, in going through it was starting to be able to call these things stories. So I was able to separate out and separate myself from these stories. So that was helpful. I got some distance from them. And he has different ways of doing that. And for me, what resonated was the radio frequency.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking of it like a radio feed, you can change the channel, right? Different things that you can do to switch it. It was helpful for me and during the journey and a little bit later managing the postpartum piece. And so then I started to think about these stories and what their function is, right? We talk about that, right? So stories have a function. And sometimes you need to change that function for that story to no longer be unhelpful, for that story to shift gears and be helpful. So I started to rewrite certain stories and certain thoughts and certain things going on in my head. So I would rewrite, I'm going to lose my kids. I am so unfocused. I am so all over the place. I am not good at this, that I'm going to take them to a store and I'm going to lose one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would rewrite that as, you are such a strong and good mom that you are worried about your kids' safety. and you're worried that this thing is going to happen. And that's a good thing. But you also have these things in place to ensure that doesn't happen. So, you hold hands and you've taught them this and you work with this. And I would list the things that I do to ensure either those things don't happen or just, do you know what I mean? Like I started to kind of reframe that story in my head.
So question for you, and I don't know if you've done it yet, but if you were to give that storyline a name, I know I can't remember if it was in the Happiness Trap that they called it doom and gloom radio or something.
Yeah.
Like what would you call it if you're like, oh, that that radio segment's coming up again? What would you call it?
Yeah, I never really named those ones because I was early in the process then.
Yeah. What would you give it now?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it had a lot to do with fear and lack of control. So I might refer to it somehow as I can't control anything right now. I'm trapped because I felt very stuck in this place that I can't seem to get out of.
Yeah, it makes me think too of I told you my husband works for radio and I listen to his show because it's actually really good and it makes me laugh. Have these different segments and one's called Agree to Disagree and one's called Scenarios. Because I know what you're talking about, Hilary. I'll have these thoughts too, but because I thought they were more intense when Matthew was younger, like, oh, he's going to suffocate in his sleep.
Yeah.
I don't laugh at it so much because it's not funny, but it is so dramatic.
My newsfeed was pretty dramatic at the time. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love this conversation so much. Okay, so I just want to interrupt for just a second and just reflect on what we've been talking about here. So remember how I was going to be experiencing sleep deprivation? Even in anticipating it, I forgot how much it would affect me. And I think this is a key takeaway for anyone experiencing short-term or long-term sleep problems. So last week, my daughter Alice, who is now 6 weeks old, she got the case of the sniffles. Hi. Are you all stuffed up? Oh dear. So she went from waking 2 to 3 times a night to waking 7 to 8 times a night. Because she was so stuffed up, she would make these like crazy stuffed up noises, and it kind of sounded like she was suffocating or breathing through a straw or something. And the sound, it would make me jolt upright in bed, stumble over to the crib, and then I would, 1, make sure that she was alive, and then 2, that she was breathing in some life-sustaining way. I think it was the combination of sleep deprivation, that short-term sleep deprivation. So there's that setting event for you. And then that old trigger, my baby at night breathing loudly with a stuffed up nose, which set me into thinking, and here's the thought, my child is going to suffocate if I don't stay up and ensure she can breathe. I used to do this so much with my son, Matthew, by the way. So this is not a new pattern for me. This thought is one of many that I've had as an anxious parent. And then I remember, oh, that's my old anxiety coming back. Hello, parental anxiety. Now, I love that Hilary mentioned the doom and gloom radio because this speaks to our brain's tendency to think thoughts, anxious thoughts in this case, and to spin stories that are completely out of control, over-dramatized, that are, as Hilary mentioned, completely unhelpful. You might even equate them to, dare I say, fake news. So when our brain does this, it engages in cognitive fusion. In acceptance and commitment therapy, we recognize this fusion as our mind getting overly entangled with what we're thinking when our mind, pings from one thought to another. Meanwhile, engaging our senses in such a way that make us feel like our thoughts are real, like our undeniable reality, and that we must do as our thoughts say or else. As Hilary says, once we get hooked, it's really hard to realize the fact that we're simply thinking and may forget to discriminate between helpful and unhelpful lines of thinking. We simply trust that our thoughts are real and true and important, and we forget to even ask, who is talking on this radio station anyhow? Should I even be listening to this? So let's step into that space for a minute and connect to our mind's doom and gloom radio. Are you ready? Okay, so here it is. Welcome, folks. It's 3:22 a.m. According to Gabby's Apple Watch, we have some breaking news. Baby Alice is suffering from a case of runny nose and is sucking in air at an alarming rate, unable to breathe without assistance from a nose bulb. Gabby could sit there in bed, but every moment that passes will be one less moment to assist her precious, indefensible baby. Oh, excellent, she has gotten up finally. Meanwhile, her husband is sound asleep, unaware of her heroics. It might be safe to return to her pillow, folks, but be advised that at any moment, Alice will need her help again. Okay, so, radio, right? So now I've caught myself. If I can kind of key into the fact that my mind is just constantly producing this, rambling script, I can unhook from that radio segment for a second and realize it's simply me thinking. That glorious thinking behavior that I tend to get all entangled in, as we all do, and that this thinking is simply a behavior that is happening. And much like the radio, we have the choice to turn the volume down and go back to bed with it on as some background noise, or turn it up, staying up late and listening to every news report with bated breath. So, what does your doom and gloom radio segment sound like? Is this radio station something you tune into and listen to while blaring, or is it something that you're able to have on in the background while you continue to live your life?
Should I get the nose Brita again? Or the nose bulb? What's your choice? Neither. Do they both make you cry? Yeah.
Before we get back into Hilary's story, I want to invite you to check out a free resource I created called An Introvert's Guide to Getting Unstuck. I created this based on my own experience as a person struggling with anxiety as an introvert. With these tools, I've learned to navigate thoughts like, why am I so damn socially awkward right now? Or the thought, I feel so isolated. Or the thought, I feel like they're judging me. This 45-minute mini course involves a series of journaling prompts, act-based exercises, and ways to help you navigate through the barriers you might face as an introvert. If you struggle internally as an introvert or shy person, or want to identify ways to thrive, go to my website, actinspiredbehavior.com, to get access to it and check it out. Just click on workshops and you'll find it there.
Does that feel better?
Okay, so let's go back to Hilary's story and see how she unhooks from her unhelpful thoughts and has learned to respond to these intrusive thoughts with a little more distance, learned to ask what values those stories represented, and tapped into that sense of self-compassion.
And so nowadays, I'm sure you still have those thoughts, right, Hilary?
I do.
How do you respond to them in the moment? So what's kind of your process?
Noticing. I think the hardest part of sort of tackling those stories is the noticing part, right? Noticing when they're there and not getting caught up in the emotion that follows.
Yeah.
So I've gotten much better at noticing those thoughts
Yeah.
and acknowledging them, and then just immediately asking, okay, but is this helpful or unhelpful right now? And usually it's unhelpful. And telling myself and going through that process, right? Of, okay, so it's not helpful. Where is this actually coming from? It's coming from a good place. You're worried. You're worried.
I
You
love
want
that.
to keep your kids safe.
Mm-hmm.
You want to, you want to be a good mom, whatever that means. You want to do those things that you're supposed to do so that your kids are okay and they grow up to be good human beings. All of that's really good intention. So that's where it's coming from. It's coming from a good place. I've started to work with self-compassion and just giving myself grace that these are thoughts and stories that are actually a good thing, in that it means I care about my kids. It means I want them to be okay and I want them to do good in life. And that's a good thing. But if I get hooked to the other side, if I go the other way, it can mean I'm limiting them. It could mean that I'm putting restrictions on them that won't let them grow, that
Not present to
right.
Yeah.
Won't let them experience and learn. And kids, tumble, and they have to learn sometimes from experiences. Am I going to let them get hit by a car? No. Am I going to let them stumble off their bike because they went over a bump, I can get there in time, but sometimes that fear is so strong. I have to stop myself from getting in there and preventing it. And it took me a bit to figure out you can't prevent these things. I'm also sleeping better now. Sleep plays a huge role in mental health, and it exacerbates mental health symptoms. And then vice versa, once you have some of these stories popping in your head, it's very hard to fall asleep, stay asleep, etc., because you ruminate. So I've also learned how to deal with some of that with sleep. I've got better routines with sleep. My youngest is 4. He still wakes sometimes at night. He comes into our bed. I don't tackle it because I like the cuddles, and mostly I can fall back asleep. But I'm starting to see he's sleeping through the night. So I think in the next year, I will actually literally be sleeping uninterrupted through the night. I'm very excited about that.
Yay! Something to look forward to.
Right? Yes, I got to hang on to something there. But the sleep has helped for sure.
I'm glad that you circled back around to that, Hilary, because these thoughts, these things that we're thinking are pretty normal. And also there's that postpartum, that hormonal change and all that. And like you said, there's this other context piece that we have to look at. We have to look at the sleep because it so very much affects everything in it's one of those just pivotal things. If we don't do it, it can exacerbate the situation. And so do you feel like that has very much influenced and kind of guided you in your work now?
Yeah, for sure. Sleep is one of those things that people talk about as a pillar of health, but it's actually the foundation of it upon which all other pillars of health stand.
Yeah.
Whatever it is you're trying to do health-wise, whether you're trying to improve mental health, maybe you're trying to get in more exercise because you want to lose weight. Maybe you're studying for an exam. If your sleep is off in any of that, your results aren't as optimal as they could be. There's research that tells us even taking a nap after studying solidifies the information. Taking a nap after a training session, if you're, let's say, working towards a race of some kind, whatever it may be, sleeping after that. Sleep helps all things, and it's the dishwasher of your body. It gets rid of the toxins and it gets rid of those things that your body doesn't need. And then it solidifies all other things, helps you with your emotions, managing your emotions, etc. So when I start to work with families, I come at it from a few different lenses. One is as a parent and understanding that how sleep deprived they are and what they're actually able to do versus not able to do. And I think sometimes that behavior analytic lens is quite intense, where you need to do these plans, you need to do these things. And for a sleep deprived parent, that's just not going to happen. And just a little bit of that values work of, what's happening with you in sleep right now. And just as a parent, what's happening with you in sleep and what could it look like? Were you sleeping better? We're in just such a better place to look after everything and to be present and to get through our day. So it's okay to tackle sleep, even if it means tackling your kids' sleep, right? Indirectly, I need to tackle my kids' sleep so I can sleep again. But I think it's just really hit home for me how important sleep is. And I often, when we help parents, the feedback we get from them about their own sleep, their own quality of life is often more meaningful to me than their child sleeping, which sounds odd because the child technically is who we're trying to help. But then indirectly, if a parent got to a better place, to me, that's a great thing, just because I remember what it was like to be so sleep deprived. And on top of that, have everything else going on. It's just such a gift to give parents.
So much compassion for those parents too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so basic. And I know that we all know that. I mean, since we're little kids, when we go to sleep, we get sleep. But it's just one of those things, it's almost like we sacrifice that first. Speaking of children.
Mommy, we bought a farm, but I broke it. And also, you want to see our family? The family of bears?
Yes, I do. Can you give me 5 more minutes, honey? It's my husband. He's like,
Mine does that. All of a sudden, I'll hear my husband saying, "Is he downstairs? How did he get down there?"
That's why I say this is about real people telling their real stories, because this is real life.
I mean, I think pandemic life too, professionalism has shifted gears and people are just doing work differently. And I think almost more humanely, like you're getting to know people a little bit more than you would have.
Okay. Well, before we leave, so I know I'm going to be editing this after the baby comes. And so I'm going to have a fresh perspective of sleep deprivation. And so I'm looking forward to that. I think this is going to be a very validating conversation to listen back to. I think that, hopefully this podcast will continue to reach people. And I would love for you to share how people can find you if they want to learn more about you or work with you.
Sure. I have two things going on. So I have mine, which is Coastal Ridge Consulting.
Mhm.
And that's also the website, Coastal Ridge ABA. People are welcome to message me on Instagram, or they can go to the website and find me there. And then I'm also on Healthy Sleep Solutions. And that's the same. That's our Instagram as well as our website. And people are welcome to come there too. We also do adult sleep. So we don't just tackle kids. We also do adult sleep as well. Yeah, so people are welcome to reach out with questions in those areas. I'm happy to talk about any of this. I just think we need to normalize all of these conversations. I think it's great you're giving a platform for that you're really giving a space and a safe space. And I appreciate that for people to talk about some of those harder human experiences and normalize them a bit.
Yeah, and I know that we both were chatting last time about how we both have those experiences of being introverted and how we feel more comfortable breaking right through the surface and going really deep in our conversations rather than chit-chatting away about nothing in particular. And that's one thing I saw my husband last night. I'm like, I'm so glad that I get this chance to talk to people about real things, and be vulnerable and be honest about who we are and just take off that professional hat for a second. And I think it actually makes us connect even greater to the people that we want to serve, because they know that we're human and we're imperfect and we make mistakes. Yeah. And that we're coming from this place of compassion too, like how you're working with your client. I've been working on my sleep a lot lately and, getting ready and trying to appreciate it as much as I can and find the value in it. So this feels very applicable in so many ways. Well, thank you, Hilary, for your time.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, enjoy your Easter with your kids and the copious amount of candy we're going to be scarfing down as we stuff those baskets. At least I'm going to be one of those people.
that was my main. I don't want to miss my morning of chocolate. The one morning.
It's our gift to ourselves.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, you take care.
Thank you.
Why do you need to sleep?
It's good for your body.
What if you don't sleep well? What happens the next day?
You get mad.
You do sometimes. Yeah, I get a little cranky, right?
Or get sick.
Or you can get sick. That's right. You just listened to Hilary McClinton, a behavior analyst and sleep specialist. I really appreciate that Hilary was willing to share so openly about her experience with postpartum anxiety. And I genuinely believe, Hilary, that you are going to help so many women, so many parents out there, not only in their sleep, but also in the simple message that postpartum anxiety exists and is something that others can suffer from. I had no idea that this was a condition before talking to you, and I know now that it's something that I experienced as a new mom with my first baby. So if this is you, you have resources, one of which is Hilary. As she mentioned, you can find her on Coastal Ridge ABA or Sound Sleep Solutions. You can go ahead and see my show notes for links to her website and ways to connect with her. The other huge takeaway for me were her insights on how sleep can play a role in this experience of postpartum anxiety. It was so profound because, of course, new moms experience sleep deprivation. But so do many parents who have kids who don't sleep well, and so do parents who stay up late or wake up early, desperate for alone time. And so do many others who struggle with healthy sleep routines who have chronic sleep issues. So in fact, many of us can relate to this experience, that we can all be impacted in our mental health when we experience a lack of sleep. When we experience that setting event, which makes behaviors like anxiety all the more likely to be triggered. And so if you can do this simple thing, if you can step back from that doom and gloom radio for a second, see if you can take stock of your context right now. Your anxiety is not a product of your failure to control it or your innate flaw as a human. It's a product of your environment. Like any behavior, the anxiety is a response to what's happening into your life right now. If we can take a moment to pause and look around, we can ask, am I getting my needs met? Am I getting enough sleep? From there, not only do we gain a bit of self-compassion, but we can then realize it's just our mind talking here and that it's pulling us out of the moment, only further serving to entangle us in worry, triggering us to engage in unhelpful actions like staying up, scrolling Facebook for more ways to worry. If that is you, I feel you. That's me too. I catch myself tuning into that radio from time to time, whether it's that parental anxiety station or my fixation on being socially awkward station or that old favorite, I feel guilty I never answer the phone when my dad calls station. Whatever it is for you, see if you can find that value there. Why is this important to you, keeping you awake at night? But also take it with a grain of salt because it's also just normal human behavior and there are tools out there for you to navigate and respond to it in more helpful ways. So stay tuned in for that because the less energy we spend paying attention to these unhelpful, overdramatic radio segments, the more energy we reserve to meeting our needs, doing those things we truly care about, and the more energy that we have to really appreciate these real moments of life happening right now.
Do you remember the book Jack's Worry? What happens in the book?
He gets mad
He does. Why?
because he thinks his mom is gonna get mad at him if he doesn't do the right note.
If you are interested in reaching out and telling your story, would like to take the Vibrant Introvert mini course, would like to join our monthly group called Act Collective, or receive one-on-one individualized support and guidance for your own personal journey, check out my service, Coaching for Vibrant Introverts, which specializes in serving those with anxiety and social anxiety. Find me on Instagram at Act Inspired Behavior or at my website, actinspiredbehavior.com. I'd love to hear from you.
What does he have?
He has a big monster worry,
Yeah.
and the more he runs away from it, then it follows him.
If this episode resonated with you, subscribe to this podcast and stay tuned for each new episode bright and early every other Wednesday. And perhaps you know someone who could relate to Hilary, myself, or might benefit from this story. If so, text them the link or share it with them on social media. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so what did he have to do?
He had to look at it and find the words, and then he said it out loud.
Yeah. And then Mom gave him a big... How's that popsicle? Good. Mom gave him a big...
Hug.
Yeah. And he kind of felt better, right? No, I don't want the popsicle.
Hello again. I want to take a moment and say that this podcast is for educational purposes only. Content and conversation provided in this podcast should not be taken as or replace professional or therapeutic recommendations. As a board-certified behavior analyst, my goal is to disseminate ACT and behavior analysis to the wider public and have meaningful conversations to further explore our understanding. If you are concerned about your own personal well-being, I encourage you to seek out the help of a licensed professional who can provide individual support to you. Thank you. Is that right, Alice? Yay! Disclaimer. All right, I'm just cracking up here because Alice continues to have hiccups. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Ay, ay, ay.